Troy is the time being, because in the company, when we don't want to deal with something, we say, let's set that aside for the time being, which means Troy will deal with it later.
I hate and love that joke because it's true.
Welcome to Venture Unscripted, a podcast where we talk with founders and entrepreneurs about their journey from 0 to 1.
Welcome. Today we've got Kall Morris Inc. We're talking to the founding team here. I'm really excited to be talking to them. We've got some cool content that and cool stories that we want to share and we want to just dig into. So I'd love to pass the baton because there's 3 of them of the founding team. I'd love to talk and pass it to Troy to introduce the rest of the team members.
Yeah. And Josh, thank you for having us today. So I'm Troy Morris. I serve as one of the 3 co-founders and the director of operations. So I'm thankfully joined by Adam and Austin. And Austin, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm Austin Morris. I serve as also co-founder, and I serve as the director of engineering, background in mechanical engineering, so I lead hardware development, basically. And then Adam.
And then I'm Adam Kall, the non-brother of the trio. I serve as director of technology for KMI, background computer science, mathematics, whole lot of data, and I deal with the immaterial of the company, so the calculations and projections that keep our future alive.
Awesome. Well, I would love to. I mean, now that we have 2 brothers here, I'm sure everyone listening is intrigued of like, how in the world did this get started with 2 brothers, Troy and Austin, and Adam over here? Like, what's the story? Give us a little bit of the story of how this all started.
Yeah. So the actual meet and greet of the first how we all met, I'll give to the other 2 because it's more their story. But how the 3 friends became a business, I'll start at least. So my background, since I was the only one who didn't share, is in business sales, training, leadership theory, development. Everything from marketing and sales to reteaching a team of 70 how to do their own jobs. So I was working a great corporate job, 401k, all those great benefits, and wasn't seeing the most out of life. There was just more to it, wasn't making my dent on the universe. And staying friends with Austin, I guess, and Adam, we found that those were kind of some shared frustrations. So we got chatting, doing what single guys will do in the 2020s of let's play some video games and just chat about our feelings. So we did. And we discovered we still had a burning interest in, outer space, in doing first principles of really changing the world around us for the better. And we needed to find a way to do that. So as we started talking about ideas, we, leaned a little bit on Austin's experience with rapid prototyping to say, well, would this idea work? Would that idea work? So I'll toss it to Austin to kind of share that part.
Real quick, before you go to Austin,
Yeah.
I thought I'd point out for those that are just listening, he was mentioning he's the marketing and sales, and he's had a corporate job, and he's the only one wearing a tie. I thought I'd point that out of like he's the one that's buttoned up out of the crew, so he holds it together. It's good.
So funny enough, we kind of touched on it, but didn't actually state it in our intros that I deal primarily with hardware as my expertise and background, and Adam deals a lot with software. And when we were first forming the company, we were like, well, we've got the hardware, the software. What is Troy? The formalware. So that's Troy's side of things.
I love it. The formal
Well, of course
wear.
he's got to show up in the tie.
It's in his ballroom. Yes.
I'm glad you picked up on that. So we were working on ideas for different space companies, different things that we could do, and like Troy said, poking holes in each of those ideas. My background in R&D often leads to, when you have a good idea, figure out why won't it work. If you can overcome all of those obstacles, then you've got something. And if not, then at least you figured out right away not to waste too much time and effort on it. So after we threw out a bunch of ideas about solar farms and space hooks and sky hooks and space elevators and all sorts of fun things, and I kept poking the same hole in every single one of what about space debris, finally Adam got fed up and said, fine, let's step back, solve that first, and then we can move on to all the other things. So we started doing some back-of-the-napkin math and figuring things out and coming to a realization of this is a solvable problem, and it's a growing problem, so it needs to be solved, but also a lot of the technology that exists already can solve that problem with just a few additional things that we could figure out. And so we started combining those things and kind of found our way into a company at that point. But then Adam, if you want to cover any of the developments from there on to where we're at now.
And
Yeah.
how you guys met. I gave you that bone.
Oh, right.
Right. So drawing it back even further of how we met initially, or how I met the brothers at least, was we met in college. We were freshman year roommates in the dorms of me and Austin meeting and realizing immediately. I think we met up in the academic dorms is where we met up. So we both said, hey, we're at school, we want to learn, we want to be good students. That's our objective. And we hit it off immediately of realizing, hey, we're both going to focus and be serious about our education. And that's why freshman year we played an ungodly amount of video games together. And what that actually showed was that we can work well together. We're friends and we can spend a long time together and be in competitive environments and still be friends while actually being good students. We did succeed in that part and not completely ignore our classes. And after graduating, we kind of drifted apart. We were all focusing on our own lives. And when we came back together, it was like that first day freshman year right back there of we're on the same page. We know what we're talking about. And we want to work together again on another project. This one maybe a little more serious and a little more business oriented, but still the same kind of fun of let's just do something together and let's make it happen. Since the part that Austin mentioned of coming together and deciding, okay, let's focus on this part as a mission, my perspective was the projection and the future forecasting of, okay, it's a growing problem. We found the data to show that space debris is growing exponentially. And if you've never heard of an exponential curve, some of the best examples are a snowball rolling down a hill, building larger and larger and larger until it's a huge problem, or a pandemic spiraling out of control where you're like, why is everyone so concerned? It's small numbers, and then it's everywhere, or a nuclear explosion. Those are all examples of exponentials which are culminated in it's not a problem until it is, and once it's a problem, it's too late. So that's what space debris looks like. It's debris generating other debris. So that means when you only have a little bit of it, it only generates like 1 or 2 additional pieces a year. But as those pieces pile on and you get more and you get more, and when you have thousands of pieces, that's when they start generating thousands more every year. For reference, I think we're up to 42,000 pieces of debris. So we're at that curve of the hockey stick, as they say. The exponential curve is starting to kick off. So it's like, okay, we need a solution now. What was really encouraging, though, was as we looked at it as a company, we said, wait, hold on. The solution is not solve the whole problem. It's not the 3 of us have to go into space and clear all thousands of pieces of debris. We actually found several papers by NASA that said, grab 5 or 6 major objects a year and you stabilize the environment. And any more you do than that starts actually repairing the environment and curing the problem in a sense. So we looked at that and said, you know what, we can do that. That is something that we can work towards, is that couple of captures a year of the most significant objects. Be smart about it, be precise in our work, and we can maybe avoid this crisis.
So you guys are the garbage men of space. Yeah. So, but it's a lot more complicated than just driving a truck around. I'll tell you that. So it's, and I think this problem is a really interesting one because I was reading a few articles about Elon Musk and SpaceX, of course, right? And you start recognizing the scale at which they're launching these satellites into space, and you're like, oh my gosh, there are thousands and thousands of these constellation of all of these different satellites, and that's just SpaceX. And you start thinking about all the different things of these satellites and things orbiting Earth, and you're just thinking to yourself, oh my gosh, who's going to solve that problem? And that's you guys.
And to point out, it's a great thing that there are satellites orbiting the Earth. They
Yes.
provide an amazing benefit. It's a wonderful step up in our infrastructure to have it in orbit, where it can help the whole world equally, because that's just how the orbits work as they go around. The issue is, if you don't do anything about it, you get one chance, and then when those satellites stop working, they're in the way, and you can't replace them. So that's what we're trying to kind of fix, is not the problem of we can't get satellites into space. It's the problem of we can't keep satellites in space, of we need to repair the environment for the next generation, for the next idea and the next upgrade.
Yeah, and that kind of idea gave us one of my favorite analogies that someone mentioned for us. So as we're all proud alumni of NMU, I even got a flag I definitely purchased, still on my wall. And we were talking to the alumni group, and one of them said, like, oh, you're like park rangers, but your park isn't, down the street or down the state. It's outer space. So you're space rangers. First off, that's been my childhood dream since I was like 6 years old. And second,
So you're like, yes, we are Space Rangers.
yeah, because just like Adam said, it's not of just go and pick up the pieces and, okay, the job's done. It's that maintenance, that maintaining it for the next generation and ourselves, that if we screw up and ruin a national park, it's gone. There is no putting back the Badlands. So that's something that we really focus on a lot in our mission, is that it's keeping space clear for all, and we really have this one true shot at it.
I will mention, though, garbage men have it a bit easier, though, because they have a city budget that pays them to do their job. And that's actually the biggest issue we found, is there's a technical aspect that we're working on, but the bigger issue is the market aspect of how do you get someone to pay for a problem that exists hundreds of miles away by default.
Yeah, and I want to focus on the interest. Both are interesting things, the technical challenge as well as the pay for challenge. And being more of a 0 to 1 podcast, the origin stories. Let's quick talk about the technical, but then I want to go to, like, how do you get someone to pay for that? Because it's a lot more complicated. I think that's where a lot of our listeners would be really interested. But from what I understand, you're going to have to correct me if I'm wrong. I went to your website. It's, for those that are listening, it's callmorris.com, but it's Kall Morris Inc. That's the name of the company. And scroll down to the bottom of the page, and they have this video on how their device works. And I watched it, and it reminds me of that villain on Spider-Man that has all the tentacles that like wraps around it, so it's and grabs it. Or in the Matrix, those crazy bad things that come after you, but they wrap around the satellite and then they grab it, right? I mean, I'll let you guys explain a little bit more, but that's what it looks like to me, and just to help them visualize.
As you've just put the fear of the biggest properties in every listener, we've gotten the analogy, everything from, it's the Kraken from Pirates of the Caribbean, to, that looks like a caterpillar in my garden. And that's the one I lean more towards.
Yeah, there you go.
Because as Austin explains in a moment here, it is something that is moving at a slow, deliberate speed for what is, relative to the ground, a very fast operation. But in space is closer to, when you see those space movies and people are moving and they've got like opera or classical music playing in the background, because everything is just moving relative to each other very slow and deliberately. But Austin, why don't you tell them a little bit more about the technology?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, growing up as a huge Spider-Man fan as a kid, Dr. Octavius, I'm okay with that analogy, but Troy's right that the technology, when it's applied in orbit, is really more like a hug or a cuddle than anything else. It's a very slow, deliberate approach.
It's a Doc-Ock hug.
Say again?
It's a Doc-Ock hug. Yeah.
Exactly, right. And who doesn't want that? I mean, you just, it's so snug. So the way the technology works is basically that it is those tentacles that, as we approach an object, those unfurl, and they've got a couple different kinds of adhesion on them that are specially designed to work on a variety of materials in the vacuum of space. And so when wrapping around an object, even if we don't necessarily have long enough tentacles to wrap all the way around the object and get a full snug, we still have enough adhesion to be able to hold on to that object and move it to wherever it needs to go. The reason we kind of geared this way is because there's a lot of objects that are going up into orbit nowadays. You mentioned Starlink earlier, for example, where there's better plans in mind. We're now, as a species, humanity is more cognizant of our behavior in space, and things that we launch up now, a lot of them have a much better plan for how do we remove this thing in the future. Either it deorbits itself, or it's got a docking adapter so that we can grab onto it easier in the future. But everything that was launched for the last 60 years didn't have that. So we took the approach of let's focus on all those objects that don't have a system in mind, and let's figure out how to grab those and how to deorbit. And we landed on the Doc-Ock hug, I suppose, as a good method of being able to grab a wide variety of objects and be able to do it safely, securely, and repeatably. Because then we can grab onto that object, move it to its new home, wherever that may be, which we can dive into in a bit, and then release it and go grab another one. Because this is all, of course, with sustainability in mind, where if you grab one, that's okay, that's great, but it's not going to make that big of a difference. You need to grab numerous objects and start really making a dent on the whole count of them.
Quick question is, how, when I'm looking at your website and I see a picture of it, how, I mean, we're all looking at it, it's like, what's the scope in terms of size? It's hard to, when in space, you're looking at something like, is that huge, or is that like a foot or two? Like, how big is that? that machine that is effectively grabbing the satellites.
Yeah, so in the launch configuration, when it's collapsed all the way down and attached onto a rocket, it's going to be pretty small, roughly the size of like your average checked bag for flying cross country. It's like a duffel bag sized. Once it's all expanded in space, the solar panels are deployed, the tentacles are unfurled. Then we're talking more like 5 or 6 feet long total, but it's not huge. It's
small enough to get through TSA.
Yeah, it's got a lot of capability for being a relatively small craft, especially compared to a lot of the things that it's going to be going after, which are anywhere from car sized to school bus sized, depending on how far along we're talking. So it's definitely geared to be as small and efficient as possible while still being able to accomplish the mission.
That's awesome. Adam, you were going to say something and I interrupted you.
Oh, I was going to add the next part of the technical problem, which is, okay, we can grab onto something, but there's actually 2 parts. The first is matching its rotation, matching its behavior. There's a process in space called rendezvous, proximity, operations, and docking. And since that's a huge mouthful, everyone just says RPOD, the acronym. And so RPOD is typically a spacecraft, the Dragon crew capsule, docking with the ISS. And the key component in that equation is they're communicating. The ISS is telling the Dragon what it's doing, the Dragon is telling the ISS what it's doing, where it's at, and they're keeping in sync. If we're going after a debris object, it's not talking to us. It's the worst roommate ever. It's in the way, it's not behaving the way it should, and it won't communicate its reasons why.
And you know because you have 2 brothers you're working with. That's what you're...
I had 2 brothers I'm working with, and I also lived in New York City for a time, so I've had my experience of bad roommates. So... trying to solve this problem, we said, okay, we can't just say, well, we need the object to communicate. That drastically limits all those historical objects that Austin was talking about. So we actually designed an AI algorithm that uses machine vision for the computer to look at the object and track features on it as it moves and predict its rotation in 3 dimensions. So it's not enough just to say it's spinning one way, it's spinning in 3 ways around various axes, and all of that is then fed into the same algorithms they use to dock with the ISS. So this is just another part of KMI is not redoing work that's already been done. We know how to dock with a cooperative object, so let's build that in-between piece of software to pretend like the debris is cooperative so we can make use of all the improvements they constantly do to increase safety with docking at the ISS. So the other problem... Oh, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say, on your projects page, is that the Tumbleye? Is that what you're...
That is Tumbleye, exactly.
Okay, I went to your web's current projects, Tumbleye. Okay. Yep, tracking.
So then the other problem is, okay, once you've tracked it and once you've grabbed onto it, now you need to move it. And this is what people who are familiar with the space immediately call out as the reason we can't solve space debris is it's too much fuel to move everything. Fuel is a precious commodity. It's hard to get into orbit. It's hard to get a lot of fuel into orbit, or at least expensive to do so. So it's like, how are you going to go and move all of these pieces? And the answer is, first off, you get the most efficient fuel you possibly can. We're designing using electric propulsion, which takes a long time. It does not have a lot of thrust, but it's constant and it's very efficient. So what that means for us is, yes, it's going to take a while to move these objects, but that's better than them staying where they're at. The other answer is taking every object and deorbiting it, bringing it all the way down to deep in the atmosphere, releasing it, and then bringing our spacecraft all the way back out takes up a lot of fuel. And that may be how we have to start, but it's not our plan for the future. The plan is take the debris and bring it to a station already in orbit to be reused. There's a plethora of reasons we want to do that. It sparks in-space industry and a whole lot of future things we can get to if we have time. But the real benefit is we use a lot less fuel. It's a lot easier to bring this object to the corner store rather than take it across the state. And so that's basically what we're doing here is bringing it somewhere close, and that means our spacecraft can capture many dozens of objects with the limited fuel they have on board, really making it efficient and commercially viable to capture these objects.
That is really cool. That is really cool. So that is the technical kind of approach you guys have taken of this tentacle thing wrapping around the satellites, and then you're effectively bringing them down to back into orbit. Is that what you're kind of bringing them down closer to Earth into the atmosphere? Is that what you're doing now? Is that kind of the thought?
If we have to, that's the part that Adam was mentioning there. That right now, if suddenly we were to launch tomorrow, that's the plan that most scientists and policymakers are most comfortable with.
Yes.
Well, I don't know. We didn't have a plan before. We just launched everything into space, and now we don't have a plan, so we'll just launch everything into the ocean. That's what happened to a lot of the big projects that have gone over time, and that's the plan to happen with the ISS. Is I don't know. I guess aim for the South Pacific Ocean. There's very few boats over there. We'll bother a few fish, and hopefully everything goes well. As you can tell from my tone, that's not our favorite plan, and there's a lot of I guesses thrown in there.
Yeah, throw it in the ocean, and then they have a similar device that curls around those things, and then they throw it somewhere, and then something else. No, I'm just kidding. You
throw
almost
it into that Pacific Rim movie, and it goes to that alien world, and that's how you get the Jaegers. It's all full loop.
It's all full circle.
So that's basically where then it's a nice segue between the technical and the commercial, where we're looking at, rather than bringing those things back down and dropping them into the ocean, let's instead bring them to a station on orbit and be able to repurpose them, recycle them, turn them into something new, and be able to use those materials that had so much time, money, and energy spent getting them up off the ground into orbit. Let's not throw that away. Let's use that. It's already there. And so let's use that material to build the new structures in space. Right now we're limited by the tyranny of rocket fairings, where everything we launch can be no bigger than the rocket fairing that it's contained within, which is currently
5
something
meters.
a couple meters. A couple meters does not a Starship Enterprise make.
No.
So we're looking at on-orbit repurposing and on-orbit assembly as being kind of the starting base for building to eventually large space structures that, obviously I'm getting a little pie in the sky with it, but it's really the foundation that builds those kinds of mega projects that couldn't possibly be built and launched from the ground because it's just entirely unfeasible. But building it in space with material that's already there, that's a heck of a lot more possible. And so that's then where it kind of swings over a little bit, and I'll pass it to Troy for a little more on the commercial side of how that plays in.
So are you guys going to build the Starship Enterprise? That's the real goal here?
That was one of the plans that Austin kept poking the debris hole in. And it's like, okay, we'll solve debris, and then that's the next thing. We've had people ask us, like investors, what's your long-term plan? What are you going to do when you solve space debris? It's like, okay, if you weren't listening, there's 42,000 objects. So the first thing is we pop champagne, because that's a huge historical feat. And the second thing is we go build Starship Enterprise. Like, it's a very clear path.
Yeah. Yep. I love it. So go ahead, Troy.
Go ahead with your question, Josh.
I was gonna change gears actually and just start asking about the business side of things, and especially, I mean, some of the things that I think listeners would be really interested in and I'm interested in is trying to ask the question, like, how does one start, like, wake up one day and they go, I want to build stuff in space, and it's like, it's not as easy as a lot of the entrepreneurs I talk with on a day-to-day basis. Software has become so inexpensive because you can just sit there and code the thing you want to test. And it's like, I'll create a website, I'll create an app, I'll create a whatever it is. And they have the tools all within their hands to create it, launch it, test it, get feedback. But imagine that. I mean, I'm just thinking of like all the different roadblocks associated with like, we want to create a satellite and we need to launch it into space and create this thing that grabs satellites. And it's like, how in the heck do you MVP that? And how in the heck do you incrementally, and who's going to fund it? There's all these questions, right? So it's like, I would love to hear from you guys of like, what has that journey been for you guys?
Yeah.
Short answer first, and then real answer from Troy. How you do it is you start as a 6-year-old Austin, Troy, and Adam, and then you spend 20 years getting experience, and then you do it. But actually, Troy, go ahead.
So for those that don't have 2 decades to begin chasing their space dreams, the first way is very similar to the software model. We built and continue to operate the company on a lean model. Now, some of that is a little different. Rather than, the software is the same. Adam still does a lot of writing and testing just in-house between his brain and the computer, just fighting it out. But rather than building an app, it's building a relatively smaller spacecraft. And we're not building an entire spacecraft. We're not building rockets. There's wonderfully 120-something countries around the world doing that. So we get to really focus on our small gap. that aspect that Austin was mentioning on the technical hardware. And when you're looking at that, it's not too dissimilar from a lot of prototyping that you can do with 3D printers, modeling software, things right at home. And we thankfully had a lot of time at home, unthankfully because of the worldwide pandemic. And so that gave us kind of a silver lining that we had that early opportunity to reach out to experts in NASA, to reach out to experts across academia, to talk to customers, everyone from major reinsurance companies to aerospace, who were all sitting at home. Everyone was trying to figure out, well, my boss said I'm supposed to have meetings, but I don't know who to talk to. Us. And that's what we really did at the beginning, was we took the opportunity as Zoom and Google Meets and a dozen other streaming services tried to get everybody on board. We leaped on. Whatever version or software or Microsoft you need, sure, let's just chat. And that was the first probably majority of that 18 months before we got our first paycheck was, let's go discover. Let's find out where we're wrong and how we can fix it, because if you're going to fail, we want to fail fast and fix it. And that's a lot of the software model. So we've taken and moved from a lot of that, and now we're more to a grounded reality as we've got some contracts with the United States Space Force. They are real. It's not just Steve Carell and a few guys in uniforms. But no, they're doing some great work. They're really bringing together and capitalizing on what the United States has been working on since we first saw Sputnik beeping overhead. The United States has been interested in space, and Space Force is kind of a natural conclusion of bringing all that under a single aspect on the military side, just as equally as it was on NASA. There was an organization before NASA. No one quite remembers their name, and if you look at the pictures, it's a mouthful. But NASA is that coalescing, bringing that idea to one central point, and that's the same way we look at ourselves, is taking these aspects from material science, from robotics, from object characterization, and incorporating them together for what our mission is of keeping space clear for all. So the mission is rather laid out in our heads. It's a lot of convincing others, though, that becomes the other aspect. So talking through what our plans are and then starting to show early demonstrations. With the hardware, we can do some demonstrations in lab. With the software, we can do some testing and share videos of that work as well. And papers, proposals, and working with partners. I've been the lucky or unlucky co-founder who has to fly out to a lot of these conferences to present at the International Space Station Research and Development Conference, or they're sending me over the ocean next month so that I can go talk to the International Astronautical Conference. So it's engaging with our peers, because far too often we've met great entrepreneurs, good ideas, but they keep the idea in a box, and they don't want to show anyone what's in the box, in the fear that they'll steal what's in the box, and it turns out the idea in the box is wrong, or it's 5 years late, or it just has forgotten some instrumental part. So a big part of the first principles line of thought that we follow is test the idea. And that requires a lot of fear, a lot of ego, swallowing it down and doing it anyways.
And I'll also add on to that one of the big aspects about this is that if it had been up to Adam and I solely, it would have been an idea in a box. We would have solved all the problems in a workshop in the basement. Nobody would have ever known about it. But we realized that this needed to be better than that and bigger than that. And that's where then bringing in Troy's skill set came into play, where we've all realized many times over the last couple of years that none of us could do this independently. This very much relies on the skill sets and capabilities that we each have, because it takes a lot. It's not an easy task, and even with the three of us, it's still not easy. So continuing to expand that team, but relying on everybody to bring their best skills to it is kind of key to the whole thing.
Mm-hmm. And then I'll mention kind of a step zero, if I may, of what Troy was just discussing of, Josh, you asked what it takes to get started. I think another aspect is that confidence to do something that feels outrageous, starting a space company. Mm-hmm. That's not something you do on a Sunday. That's not supposed to be anyway, but it's something we did. And what I think it calls or requires is, so my background is as a mathematician, and people always look at that and they're like, how? How do you enjoy looking at numbers? How do you do these enormous equations that make no sense to anyone? And the answer is that very young, my parents convinced me that every math question has an answer. And that knowledge is key of looking at a situation and saying, does an answer exist to this? And more importantly, is there any reason why I should believe the answer cannot exist? If we started with warp drives, I would say, okay, I have physics reasons why I don't think a warp drive can exist, at least not right now. So I don't need to pursue that. But when we looked at space debris removal, I said, okay, I'm convinced there is a way to do this. I don't know it right now. But because that answer exists, because I'm convinced it's out there, I can't leave it alone now. I can't just say, man, that was a really hard problem. I'm just going to leave it here on my desk next to where I work, just unfinished, and I'm just going to set it there and not worry about it. No, I'm the kind of guy that's going to say, man, that's really frustrating, slam it down, walk away, and 5 minutes later I'm back at the desk saying, but what if I try it this way? And it's that same mentality of we looked at the problem and said, there has to be a way to solve this. There's no law of physics that says you can't grab something in space, so let's figure it out. And there have been many days that one of us wants to quit because we're like, this thing is frustrating, we're not figuring it out, it's not working. And then someone's like, hey, but what if we tried this? And that starts a whole new path. So that confidence and that fortitude to just say the answer is out there, the solution is out there, both technical and business, and you keep working at it until you find it.
The truth is out there for those X-Files fans. So I like it. No, that's great. A lot of good knowledge here, guys. I love it. So let me ask you this question. So what I'm gathering is it's interesting because like we started, it's a different, normally when you're dealing with just software, it's very iterative in the fact that you can deliver a small bit of value first and be like, and incrementally add more and more and more value. But here it's almost like you guys, correct me if I'm wrong, what I'm hearing is like you went through the process and you're doing it in a way that's very open. You're kind of doing open innovation, if you will, and talking with people about this is what we're doing, this is how we're doing it. And then you're allowing people to give you that feedback and tweaking as you're going into those models. And so, but the interesting difference here, as I'm seeing, is there any way, just out of my own curiosity, is there any way that's like you and this is where maybe some differences are in this grandiose space idea, is like how the incremental value, it's not like you're like, oh, we can launch a satellite tomorrow or launch something in space tomorrow and it adds incremental value and then we'll launch another one and then we'll launch another one. It's like super expensive to launch something into space. It's super time consuming to build something. So it's kind of like, is that a fundamental difference? Are we honing in on that correctly, do you guys think?
It's very similar because, not that software is easy. I'll say that both to our software developer on team and the millions of companies out there, but you get that fortunate opportunity, like you said, to try it out. I don't know, here's an alpha, here's a beta, here's, we'll go through the entire Greek alphabet, and if you've got people interested to try it, you can keep doing that.
Yes.
In aerospace, you don't. Many times
yes.
You build something, you build multiple versions of it, and you try and break each and every single one to find out how they're going to fail for heat, how they're going to fail on the shake table, how they're going to fail for just the sound volume of launch can destroy things. Just sound alone. So it's something that there's a lot of work done in preparation to launch, which also working this, startup for aerospace has completely ruined my ability to hear the word launch when people talk software in a normal sense. Because launch is like, okay, we get some cake, we hit a button, upload, and we look for the first download, the first 100 downloads. We're a success. Congratulations. Let's go with the bar. Launch in aerospace is a lot bigger, scarier, and more exciting because when it happens, people hug and kiss each other. You have a great time, but it's also so stressful that people have just, lost hair or it goes gray while waiting for that rocket to go T-1. We have liftoff.
Yes.
And then you're still waiting. It's not just done.
Like, oh,
you have to make sure it gets to orbit, it communicates. A thousand problems begin once you have liftoff. So it's similar in a lot, and the terms have blended from aerospace into the general ecosystem of launch, of checking in, of these other things. We've lost communication. I've heard in a sales role, and I'm like, no, he just didn't answer his phone because he's at lunch. That's different than losing communication with a multi-million-dollar spacecraft hurtling at 17,000 miles per hour. So in our world, it's a lot of that preparation beforehand because we have to do our iterations before a alpha or a beta. You rarely get a second chance.
I'll mention the answer for how do you achieve this. If someone listening to this podcast says, oh man, I'm inspired, I've always wanted to start a space company, I'm doing that this weekend. One of the key things that has enabled us is the government SBIR and STTR programs. They're small business innovation and research grants. And the whole idea behind it is all right, you have a technology or something that needs more funds than you have available to get it to that MVP. You go through this grant process, this proposal writing that's hard and laborious, and you have to wait months and months to find out that you weren't selected or you were selected, but there's a caveat and this long process. And if you get it, the government will fund you without taking a portion of your company or something to develop that technology. One key requirement of it, which I've actually come to love as much as I hated it at the beginning, is writing about the commercial opportunity and writing about how you're going to make it successful once you do it. But it really allows that kind of jump start of this expensive technology. What I'll add, though, is when we started, all of our investor advisors, the ones who have helped startups become unicorns, the ones who have invested millions and turned it into billions, like those kinds of people told us, don't work with the government. They said it's laborious, they said it's exhausting, it's not worth the effort. Go just raise money, raise capital, and you'll be fine. And what it actually kind of sounded like to us is, oh, there's less competition at the government side. Because it's a hard barrier to entry, because you have to work so hard at it, there's fewer companies doing it. There's still a lot, but it's fewer. It's fewer than the thousands sending emails to VCs in Silicon Valley. It's a different approach. Can we maybe capitalize on that? And as it turns out, all three of us were very strong students in school. We learned how to write a paper or two. And our first proposals maybe sucked a little, but we got better at it. And at this point, we feel fairly confident in our ability to write proposals. We still aren't selected often, but when we are, that's the stepping stones we have to make, is how to get this technology sponsored by the government or someone else to get it to that MVP. Because you're right, the first step of showing this idea works is a satellite orbiting in space, grabbing a piece of debris, and that costs millions of dollars.
Yes, that is it. And that's like Troy, you were mentioning, that is launch. When that happens, it's after launch, right? It's a successful mission, and then a software company's like, we have a successful mission every 2 weeks. It's like, I don't know what you guys are talking about. It's a
or
far
they can put out a
different beast.
patch. That's the other fun part.
That's right. Exactly. We'll just patch it, and it's like with you guys, it's like, that is quite a bit away in the sky. I don't think we could just flash the firmware.
I've got a long screwdriver, but I don't think it's that long.
Oh man. So your journey, Adam, am I hearing this correctly, is like basically from the get-go. I mean, the first money into the business was grant money from the government. Is that accurate or no?
Actually, no. The first money into the business was our own blood, sweat, and tears, and then our own limited savings, and then we actually were able to do a pre-seed raise from friends and family and a very important lead investor, the Michigan Rise Capital Group out of Michigan, that saw what we were working on, saw what we were doing, and believed in us enough to give us that first chance. To bring in a grant writer and several other key employees to help make those proposals and really bring them to the next level. So that is to say that was kind of our first step, is raising that extra capital. That has led to, as Troy mentioned, 3 government contracts that have multiplied that capital. The amount we raised, we have received more than that in these government grants by several multiples. And so just like you want to see your pre-seed go to a seed, go to a Series A, and the value of the company increase over and over, we've kind of done that in the first round of the pre-seed money from friends and family raised from investors has been multiplied as non-dilutive government equity. And we're going to take that to now raise a seed round that's even more, and use that seed round to raise the next round of government grants. We're kind of jumping back and forth between them so that one isn't saturated and kind of consumed too quickly.
That's good. Now you had mentioned, I think Adam, you said if someone came to you and said, "Oh, I want to start a space company," and you're like, "Well, this is what would you actually say if someone on the weekend was like, "Hey, man, I'm thinking about starting a space company." Like, what would you tell them?
I want to start on this one because I've had that question. We've had people that have seen our success, and either they are fellow alumni, or they're from Michigan, or they've just, I saw your website, I saw your story, it's so cool. People seen, podcasts like this. Now, hopefully we've gotten better at these types of interviews over time. But the big thing is, exactly that, of finding what drives you. I was fortunate enough to be on a panel last week out in Colorado Springs, invited by the United States Space Force and major universities from across the country. And we had that question of how do you figure out, and in their case, it was the scope of a research project. But a research project for a university and a business is not dissimilar. It's just one has a very big checkbook already, and the other you're constantly fighting for one. But the real key to both of them, and then we'll let Adam add, is you have to find that inspiration. You have to find what drives you, because it being paid for isn't enough. There's thousands of jobs out there. I worked one of them where you're just getting paid and it's good enough. But you have to find something that drives you, whether it is aerospace or otherwise. And our drive was to aerospace. So we were able to jump over those extra tall hurdles that come with doing anything in orbit. But Adam, the question was to you. I just had to jump in there because it was so recently relevant.
I appreciate it, Troy, because it's a great answer. And for me, I actually had a similar experience. I did a talk in Traverse City, Michigan, and afterwards I had these 3 young people come up to me, and they said, man, we were inspired by that. We want to do a space company too. And I looked at the 3 of them, and I thought about the 3 of us, and I was like, wait, hold on, what are your interests? And one of them really likes engineering, one of them is really into programming, and the other really liked business. And I was like, all right, the most serious advice I'm ever going to give you, because you are us. And what I told them is similar to Troy: find the thing that you're passionate about, find the thing that you want to solve or you want to do. If you can't think of something, listen to what the leaders in the industry are talking about. I've seen several conversations from Thomas Zurbuchen, one of the associate administrators of NASA, asking for clean rocket fuel. He doesn't want to use hydrazine anymore. He wants clean rocket fuel. This is an open call to anyone with an idea for a space company. Take that and run with it. If you can figure out clean rocket fuel, someone wants it. So taking that idea, but then the next step is you really have to sit down and be honest with yourself and say, is there an economy to this? Not just a market, not just a customer, but an economy. A process by which this is useful and this continues. I'll say for us, we didn't think of reusing space debris as at the get-go. We were completely focused on just grabbing debris and people will pay us for that. And we found out very quickly that no, that is an association that is someone has money, they hand it to us, and that's the end of the engagement. So that runs out. Either their pile of money or just their willingness to share it runs out eventually. So that's why we looked at it and said, it's the same problem. It's space debris needs to be removed, but we're going to look at it as someone is handing us money for us to hand them the space debris, just in a form that they actually want it. So that's the in-space recycling in industry, and that has now turned the problem from one that runs out of steam to one that builds. The more we hand them reusable debris, the more we hand them material in space, the more they're able to build with it, the more they want to build with it, and that grows rather than shrinks over time. So that's my advice for a space company: is space is littered with hard problems that look like they need to be solved exactly one time. So look at that and figure out how can that solution be applied to a problem that is solved many times over continuously and making the whole environment better.
Great answer. Great. No, I think another two closely related questions that are going to wrap us up here is one, and I'll let you guys answer, whoever wants to answer these 2 questions. What is one of the biggest assumptions you guys made that was right or wrong? One of the biggest assumptions so far, because I'm sure there's a lot more assumptions in your journey ahead, but like so far. And then we answered, just the question of like, if someone were to say, I want to start a space company, what would you say? Now, more generically, what would be the biggest piece of advice you would have for listeners of like, as they're looking to go from 0 to 1 and starting their company and realizing not everyone wants to start a space venture? In your experience and so far in building, Kall Morris Inc., what has been the biggest learning and the biggest, hey, here's some advice that I'd have? So to recap, biggest assumption and then some advice you'd have.
I'll take the second half, but I'll toss it to Adam and Austin for the assumptions, because they had a lot at the beginning. They had to sell me first of this science project becoming a business. So you guys have, I think, some of the best assumptions.
easiest, biggest assumption at the start was that we could start a space company. That still feels like a giant assumption. That still feels like a gamble we run every day. And every day that I wake up and I'm still director of technology for KMI and there's still meetings to attend and problems to figure out, I'm just like, yeah, this is still happening. And it's kind of surprising. So that's the first assumption, is we just assumed we could do it and then figured out the path.
I'll kind of piggyback on that a little bit in the sense that, assuming we could just decide to and make it happen, but almost kind of touching back on what something Adam said earlier, also assuming that there is a solution, assuming that we can, with existing technologies and minimal new technologies, figure out a way to actually accomplish this task, that it's not some insurmountable invent warp drives kind of obstacle. It's like, no, there is a solution to this. We just need to find it, and we need to cobble together whatever pieces of existing research there are to combine all those in a new way that hasn't been put together before that allows us to actually solve this. And fortunately, so far, it seems like that was an accurate assumption. There have definitely been a good smattering of less accurate ones. But like Troy said earlier, finding those out and failing fast on those allowed us to then pivot and continue in the right direction. But then I'll go ahead and pass to Troy for the second half,
Yeah, so, I would still repeat the part we said earlier of inspiration and finding what inspires you, but kind of continuing the point Adam made mention of inventory. Take inventory of what you know, and take inventory of who you know. Take inventory of the resources you have accessible of, well, I can't do anything. I'm just, out in the middle of the desert. There's no businesses around here. Whatever could I do? Turns out that's where people like launching a lot of rockets, because there's no one around. There's nothing to hit. So sometimes your biggest detriments that you might have, either geographically, socially, your perspectives, can give that difference by acknowledging what you have. We are three young gentlemen trying to enter a industry with a lot of experienced players. But one of our early advisors pointed out, but you guys have energy. You guys respond to me in 20 minutes or overnight. You guys are quick to respond and able to fill out these papers and proposals that others just have other burdens, other interests that they can't. So anytime you look at yourself and like, oh, this is a negative, I'm too young or I don't know enough, you may not have the assumptions that others are held back by. So the final cap is, while that's a big knowledge to chew on, it is the 3 points that were brought to me by a great military advisor that we have had the fortune of working with multiple times. And he shared a lesson he learned from his own advisor of there's 3 things in the military on knowledge. There's what you know, there's what you know you don't know, and there's what you don't know you don't know. What you know is I'm Troy and I can, talk to people. What I don't know, what I know that I don't know, is how to do ones and zeros, weld, put these parts together. So I found people who could. And what you don't know, in the military is normally what kills you. In the business world, it's what bankrupts a company or sinks it. And those are the parts that we're always actively seeking to find out what we don't know. And that's by working with your network. That was one of the things we inventoried early is we have this opportunity. We have this ecosystem to support us, from the Center on Rural Innovation to local aspects of our alumni network to friends and families and the brother of someone on the MIT board. So sometimes you'll just have these connections that by luck, chance, or Adam speaking to Thomas Serbuchin as a freshman, chance and luck help. But you've got to put your brain to it as well. So I think that would be kind of the biggest advice is those 3 statements. Know what you know what you don't know, and find like hell to find what you don't know you don't know.
No, that's some solid advice. I mean, it echoes what you guys had said earlier about, that I would call it open innovation, that you guys are very open about things. And I think people too closely hold fast to ideas rather than saying the magic is in the execution. The magic is in you guys' stamina. The magic is in, your team to bring that to market, not necessarily in, hey, let me tell you about, how we're going to clean up space junk and, all these dead satellites. Let me tell you about the exact specifics of that. Oh no, someone might steal all of the information about it. It's like, no, you're going to learn more. And I think that's a solid statement that you guys made and points to Troy. What you're just saying is you guys are wanting to know what you don't know. It's like, let's figure out what we don't know. It's
so funny to us when people tell us about like, oh yeah, holding that idea too close, because we almost did that. And then we realized or I realize at least because I was the one who started this, of my goal lies beyond space debris. So we've kind of run this company in an aggressive way that would terrify certain entrepreneurs of we're like, yeah, take the idea. If you're listening to this podcast and you're thinking, these three guys, they don't know what they're doing, I can do a better space debris removal company. I'm speaking to you right now, listener. Do it. Please do it. I don't want to actually solve space debris. I want to do all the other things. Space debris is just in the way. So if that listener goes out, does a company, does it faster and better than I ever could, and solves this problem, I've won. That is victory for me, and I am happy about it. So it's like that boldness has really helped us in that open innovation of we're not scared to talk about it because our victory lies beyond solving just this one problem. We don't want to hold on to space debris as a market maker for 50 years. We want to fix it so we can do something else.
That's awesome. No, you're right on. I really appreciate you guys at Call Morris Inc. joining me, bringing some great words of wisdom, telling me that I could never, ever start my own space company because it seems really hard. And I know I could do it if I wanted to and I put my mind to it, but it seems very challenging, and I'm glad the world has people like you three to really lead that charge. So very inspiring, very cool what you guys are doing. I appreciate you guys jumping on and talking.
Josh, thank you for having us. It's wonderful to talk about this. We'll be excited to hear other entrepreneurs that are either mad at Adam or inspired by Adam. That's two of the big results we normally get. But we love to interact with people. We're on most social media channels and directly through our website, callmorris.com. But we'd love to hear and meet with more.
Awesome. Thanks again, guys. Appreciate it.